This is a simplified descriptions on how traditional Ethiopian society broadly operated for millennia. Before Western dogma and centralization policies of Haile Selassie illegally removed the laws and customs of the communities of Ethiopia, and especially the checks on power that lasted since before Axumites, which lead to rise of socialism, communism, sectarian violence, and eventual ethnic politics that plague the Horn of Africa today. If you want a detailed breakdown with cited sources and better explanation, the two best books are Ethiopian Warriorhood, Defense, Land and Society, 1800 to 1941, book by Tsehai Berhane Selassie, and Radicalism and Cultural Dislocation in Ethiopia, 1960 to 1970, book by Messay Kebede. Some, if not most people alive, genuinely have no understanding of how the chaos of Ethiopian society was tempered from being an autocratic hell or a feudal society similar to Europe. This will break down in simple terms how one society can survive 1,206 years of economic embargoes/restrictions from 709 AD to 1885 AD and 1906 to 1936. 709 AD Arab invasion of Axum to Khedive of Egypt, leaving Massawa to the Italians illegally in February 5, 1885, and Tripartite Treaty, December 13, 1906, to the full invasion of Ethiopia, and arms landed as the League of Nations uplifted the arms embargo only shortly before the Italian invasion in 1936. 54 major invasions, minimum of 450 small wars/raids, and 70 known civil wars at the same time without collapsing like any other society, if having suffered the same adversity, literally, would not have existed or been enslaved to the four corners of the earth. Simply put, what gave Ethiopian society a foundation that can suffer the longest economic embargoes in human history while all this occurred? It's simple. It's the societal structure that allowed it to last over 2,000 years in the same cultural context and value system intact. The religion and languages may have changed, but the social structure functioned the same way for millennia. Most people have a distorted understanding of medieval Ethiopian society from cultural bias propagated from communist dogma of the Derg and the TPLF-era regime ethnic talking points. Even people who lived under Tafari Makonnen's reign were too young to know or remember what life was like. So you might ask how this happened. Simply, the devastation of the Italian occupation until 1941 caused 9 to 10% of the population to be frank, was an extermination of the people of Ethiopia. The only other countries who survived worst population purges in World War II was China, with 12% of their population, and the USSR, which had lost 25% following the Nazi campaign east under Operation Barbarossa, leaving a vacuum of memory and culture from the younger people of the Horn of African community in Abyssinia. Simply put, unless you were born before 1931, the year he illegally removed the law of kings, Feta Nagast, the constitution/Bill of Rights of the whole society for over 2,000 years and bedrock of the Ethiopian social contract, how can you know? Now the breakdown shown in front of you is a simplified flowchart on how Ethiopian society operated and how the checks and balances worked, and how the various authorities come from and legitimacy flows from. So the biggest social amnesia of Ethiopian society is also the most tragic. The key political force of Ethiopia for the past millennia were the Chiwa, coming from the Ge'ez word Tsewa. The Chiwa were the legionary knights of Ethiopia, while the Mesafint were the elite nobles of Ethiopian society. They were both broadly considered Mekwanit, which means nobles, but that is a gross generalization. M1 and M2 represents both the Chiwa equals M1 and the Mesafint equals M2. The Chiwa gained legitimacy from the people given land grants and taxation by the emperor and answered only to him, but their integration into the local populace is where legitimacy came from. As such, they had a community-based training system similar to the Spartan agoge, but unlike that where the state pays for it, the average Ethiopian pooled money for training and arms for all boys and some girls to be raised from childhood in war. All males and up to 1/5 of women in Ethiopia knew how to use weapons since childhood. The highest-ranking Chiwa were nobles, the conventional Mekwanite, who after decades of successful military campaign and earning legitimacy on the battlefield was both military commander and administrator of his region. The distinction of a Mesafint and a Mekwanite is simple. To be a Mesafint, you and your family would have to have been in politics for 2 generations or longer, meaning your grandfather followed by your father or uncles would have to have been in politics in your home region minimum. And the most elite families have been around for centuries, of which the highest ranking were those with Solomonic royal blood, due to political marriages and polygamy being normal in Ethiopian society. And because of this, most of the civil wars tended to be between mediocre or inept Mesafint, trying to stop from being replaced by new nobles who came from the lowest of society, farmers, slaves, and at times women, best example of which is Ras Alula Engeda. The Axumite codes of conduct allowed all of society to participate in combat. Women who fought in war earned the right to economic and land ownership authority of their own dominion, regardless if they live under their father's household or were even married. Hence why the word Jegna, the Ethiopian word for hero, is unisex. But the harshness of war, specifically the lack of surrender rules or morals, lead to only few women being brave or ruthless enough to fight. Lower-ranking Chiwa were the ground troops, and below them the Fano, shifter, and hunters. Shifter had 2 context meanings. Regular shifter were rebels who robbed and attacked the Mesafint and helped their community in the countryside, essentially Robin Hood as an example. And Metfo shifter were outlaws who robbed and abused anyone not part of their group/gang. Hunters were the full-time Fano who hunted big game. These were the key trainers in peacetime for Ethiopian society to have combat experience whence dealing with Africa's megafauna. And Chiwa had the right, if Mesafint or even the emperor abused the people, to rally them into Fanos equals militias to defend the right of the people against abusive government and the country from foreign invasions. And once captured nobles under Axumite custom, if seen as committed high treason, would have their limbs amputated alive, then their torso and head, while alive is fed at dusk or dawn to the hyenas. Then their immediate family, meaning their kids and wives, are to be clubbed to death by their own hometown population, or beaten badly and sold to foreign slavers never to see the homeland again. They were a social cancer. The emperor would then give their property to the Chiwa to divide amongst the people as an apology for the failure in leadership. The head of the Orthodox Church was the emperor, but legitimacy came from the church itself and Chiwa who put him on the throne. All royal male members were kept in house prison in mountains called ambas, either outright, a prison palace, or churches, most for the remainder of their lives. As in Ethiopia, the oldest son doesn't automatically become the heir. The most capable son does. Operation with the logic of a lion pride, some of the best emperors and rulers tended to be the younger sons of an emperor. So Ethiopian society operated a decentralized authority and, where the monopoly of violence came from, the people always. Anytime nobles wanted to make new policies on restrictions, restricting civilian access to weapons, and especially in later centuries, to firearms, people would protest. If the Mesafint in charge still wanted to move forward with it, he would have to deal with every able-bodied male and some capable women, and with many veterans in their home mountain, turning the mountains into a killing field and having the legitimacy of the church behind them. Simply put, restrictions on weapons was the ultimate taboo in Ethiopian society. As the old Ethiopian adage goes, a man without weapons is no safer than a woman by herself in the Nile. So what changed? Teferi Makonan's policies were one-for-one copies of Napoleon III's policies in France. He was a major Francophile, thinking centralizing policies would work in Ethiopia and without the people's consent. When he changed the laws in 1931, he couldn't enforce the policies anywhere, even in his father's home province of Chiwa. The laws were too foreign and people were rebelling. Post-occupation, the political vacuum left in the destruction of Ethiopia allowed him to pack the government with loyalists who left Ethiopia with him, who were the leftist of the time simply for being European-friendly, while the conservative Ethiopian majority of nobles stayed in the country and died heroes. The fallback of the war caused a new political alliance. Selassie removed the Chewa, who survived, and stopped access to weapons and gave special privileges and protection, with no checks on power to approved nobles, regardless of their behavior in any region he put them in. This would lead to the Gojami Rebellion, from the illegal execution of Haile Selassie. After the entire province of Gojam exterminated all Shiwans in the province and threatened to blow up the only bridge that led out of Gojam into Ethiopia over the Nile. The significance of this was that Gojam was the least gassed region by the Italians and was the only stable agricultural output of the country, essentially holding the only clean food uncontaminated by chemical warfare of the country hostage when multiple provinces were dealing with famine. Forced Selassie to let them govern themselves, but he politically isolated them for the entire length of his reign. The success of the Gojami Rebellion led to the Wayan Rebellion, the Bale Rebellion, and all other turmoil of Ethiopia during his reign due to its success. People alive don't understand this big picture nuance of how this change happened. So, as Selassie became more radicalized and socially isolated post-1960, the Mengistu Niue coup. His final solution to fixing Ethiopia would be his failed education policy, thinking that if isolated and educated certain youth from across the empire in boarding schools overseas or in special boarding in Addis Ababa, they would think like him and fix the country. The failure was, as he became older, he became even more corrupt and used public funds for personal use, which was illegal under the old laws but legal under the various constitutions he changed multiple times. The nail in the coffin was the 1972 to 1975 Wallow famine caused by him using 1/3 of the country's treasury in taxes for his 80th birthday, inspired by going to the Shah of Iran's birthday, which was 100% preventable, where 250,000 people died and millions more starved, flooding the capital city. The soldiers, once loyal to the people before his reign, now got a consistent salary, but had their right to be called nobles removed, forcing them to show their allegiances to the central government in Addis. Which is why abuses done by his regime were so unique and brutal compared to the past emperors before. Why? Because they couldn't do half the stuff he did or get away from stealing from the treasury without the people's consent. They would have been arrested, tried, executed under the law of kings, example Ios I by Ras Mikael of Tigray, and replaced by a son, brother or uncle in Amba. This led to the social degradation of Ethiopia for 90 years, as every successive government promised change. But at the same time, every following government from the Derg till today was and is against the traditional idea of Fano, meaning the people militias, with the people being an armed population that can challenge central government power and policy. This was the Ethiopian social contract. Every man was king of his own home, and the emperor was the steward of the nation and would swear himself to poverty, suffering and war for the good of the empire, as was custom in speeches made on their coronations in Axum from the Axumites before all the way until the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie. The social contract was simple. You must defend Ethiopia, and so doing you can be free. A woman can own land, and a poor man can rise and, where anyone can be born in the lowest of society, but if capable, die as one of the most powerful people of the empire. Loyalty was everything. And it was the core of how the community survived over 1,200 years of embargoes, of which in that time period, in a 25-year period, the average Ethiopian survived on average 1 major invasion or war, 9 raids/small wars, and roughly 1.5, so roughly 1 to 2 civil wars every 25 years on average for over a millennia back. 2 back at the same time, meaning more live combat experience than any other civilization in history, only until modern army doctrine globally for special forces. And this was population-wide, not elite core troops. It was through the Chewa, who checked the Mesafint and Emperor, at times the core veteran legions of the national army, whose legitimacy of the key regiments from the local people is where their authority came from, not the central government. So once they were gone, Ethiopians had less and less rights and protections as time progressed from the Derg to today. No following government wanted to make a world where they share power with the Balajer, the word for the people of the rural areas, or in other words, the countryside people, which for millennia this word was a word meaning pride and prestige, but now turned to insult by modern Ethiopians in Addis for backwardness, but it is the Balajer, who make up the plurality of the society even today in modern Ethiopia.